This is all I got. Please don't let my mommy die. Those 7 words would cost Enzo Mancini everything he thought he'd left behind. The Astor Grand Hotel lobby gleamed under crystal chandeliers, all Italian marble and hushed luxury, the kind of place where even whispers felt too loud. Past midnight, the space belonged to ghosts and gangsters. Enzo Mancini's polished Oxfords clicked across the floor with the rhythm of a ticking clock, his tailored suit absorbing light like a black hole. Security guards flanked him, 3 men with dead eyes and loaded weapons, fresh from a meeting where someone's fate had been signed away. Then she appeared. A tiny girl, couldn't have been more than 3 years old, stepped out from behind a marble pillar like she'd materialized from nowhere. Worn-out sneakers. Oversized gray sweater with a stain on the shoulder. Brown hair tangled like she'd been running. And in her small, trembling hand, a crumpled dollar bill that looked like it had been through a washing machine. The guards moved instantly. Carlo's hand shot toward his jacket. Vincent stepped forward, reaching for the child's shoulder. Enzo raised one finger. Everything stopped. Guards froze mid-motion. The night manager behind the desk didn't breathe. Even the elevator seemed to hold its position, refusing to ding. The girl looked up at Enzo Mancini, the man who controlled half the East Coast's underground, who ordered executions over espresso, who hadn't felt fear or mercy in 20 years. Her eyes were wide and wet, but they didn't look away. "Mister," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "my mommy says you help people, if they pay." She stretched out both hands, offering the dollar like it was the crown jewels. Enzo stared at the wrinkled bill. George Washington's face was barely visible through the creases. The child's fingers were red from cold, her nails bitten down to nothing. "This is all I got." Her bottom lip trembled. "Please don't let my mommy die." The lobby was silent except for the distant hum of the HVAC system. Enzo Mancini, who'd broken men twice his size, who'd walked away from car bombs and FBI raids, who'd watched his own father bleed out without flinching, felt something crack in the center of his chest. Something he didn't have a name for. Ever see a man built of violence stopped cold by innocence? If this story makes your heart race, show us some love with a like and share it with someone who believes in helping each other, and drop in the comment where you are watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us hope and love. Enzo's first instinct was survival. This had to be a setup. No child wandered into his world by accident. Not past security, not at this hour, not carrying a payment and a plea. His mind ran through the possibilities like shuffling a deck. Rival families testing him, undercover operation, elaborate con. But the girl wasn't acting. Her fear was too real, her hands shaking too much. She smelled like industrial cleaner and cheap fabric softener. The scent of someone who lived in the service corridors of luxury, never tasting it. Enzo lowered himself slowly, one knee touching cold marble. He was eye level with her now, this tiny thing who'd somehow breached a fortress. "What's your name?" His voice was soft, controlled, the tone he used before making irreversible decisions. "Sharon Lopez." No hesitation. "My mommy is Maria Lopez. She cleans the rooms here. She works real hard." Maria Lopez. The name detonated in Enzo's memory like a grenade he'd forgotten he'd swallowed. His jaw tightened. His eyes flickered, just for a second, but enough that Carlo noticed. Enough that Vincent's hand moved away from his gun. Enzo took the dollar bill from Sharon's outstretched hands. He folded it carefully, precisely, and slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket, right over his heart. "Carlo," Enzo said, still looking at Sharon, "lock down this lobby. Quiet. No one in or out." "Boss." "Now. Vincent, pull every employee file from the last 20 years. Focus on housekeeping. I want background, addresses, work history, everything." "On it." Enzo stood slowly, his shadow falling over the little girl like a blanket. "Sharon, you're going to wait here with my friend Marco. He's going to get you some hot chocolate." "But my mommy." "I know." Enzo's voice was steady as a surgeon's hand. "I'm going to help your mommy. That's what you paid me for." Sharon's eyes lit up, pure, unfiltered hope that felt like staring into the sun. Enzo walked toward the private elevator, his guard scrambling to follow. His mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating angles, mapping connections. But underneath the cold strategy, something else churned, something that felt suspiciously like emotion. Because 15 years ago, in an alley behind this very hotel, a young maid named Maria Lopez had found Enzo bleeding out from a bullet wound. She could have screamed, could have called the cops, could have earned a reward. She'd done none of those things. She'd cleaned his wound with shaking hands, hidden him until his men arrived, and disappeared back into her invisible life without asking for a dime. Enzo had never repaid that debt, had convinced himself she'd forgotten. That debts to people like her didn't count. Now her daughter stood in his lobby holding a dollar bill and a prayer. The bill's been due for 15 years, Enzo thought as the elevator doors closed. Time to pay it in full. Inside the elevator, Enzo's phone buzzed. Carlo's voice came through, tight and urgent. "Boss, we got a problem. Maria Lopez is flagged in the system. She's being held at a private medical facility in Queens. Armed detail. Multiple units." Enzo's expression didn't change, but his knuckles went white against the elevator rail. "Who's holding her?" "The Castellano family. Word is she witnessed something she shouldn't have. They're keeping her quiet." Vincent spoke up from behind. "There's more, boss. Medical records show internal bleeding. Critical condition. She's got maybe hours, not days." The elevator reached the penthouse level. The doors opened to Enzo's private office, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, a city he owned piece by piece. But for the first time in years, the view meant nothing. Enzo walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a secured phone. The kind with no records, no trace. He began making calls. First to his accountant. "Freeze every Castellano account we touch. Every single one." Second to his lawyer. "I want documentation on every judge, every politician, every cop the Castellanos have in their pocket. Send it to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Anonymous tip." Third to his fixer. The medical facility in Queens holding Maria Lopez. "I want her transferred to Mount Sinai within the hour. Best surgeons on standby. Cost is irrelevant." Carlo stepped forward, concern etched on his face. "Boss, the Castellanos aren't going to just let her go. This could start a war." Enzo turned, his eyes cold as January. "Let me be clear. Maria Lopez saved my life when I had nothing to offer her. Her daughter just paid me $1 to return the favor. That makes this personal. And I don't lose personal debts." He pulled the crumpled dollar from his pocket, smoothing it on his desk. Under the office lights, it looked even more pathetic, wrinkled, torn at one corner, marked with a child's fingerprints. "This," Enzo said quietly, "is the most expensive payment I've ever accepted, because it's going to cost me everything I've spent 20 years building to honor it." Vincent and Carlo exchanged glances. They'd been with Enzo long enough to know what this meant. When he made promises, he kept them, even if it burned his empire to ash. Especially then. "Get every resource we have," Enzo commanded. "Lawyers, doctors, transport. I want Maria Lopez in surgery within 90 minutes. And I want the Castellanos to understand they just made the worst mistake of their miserable lives." The phone buzzed again. This time it was Marco, watching Sharon downstairs. "Boss," Marco's voice was uncharacteristically soft. "The kid keeps asking if her mom's gonna be okay. What do I tell her?" Enzo looked out at the city. His city, built on fear and blood and calculated violence. Then he looked at the dollar bill on his desk, still holding the warmth of a child's desperate grip. "Tell her," Enzo said, "that her dollar just bought her mother a second chance. And tell her that Enzo Mancini always keeps his word." He ended the call. Outside, dawn was still hours away. But inside Enzo's chest, something long dormant had awakened. Not mercy, not softness, something far more dangerous. A conscience. But to understand why this moment mattered, why a dollar bill and a dying maid could shake the foundation of an empire, you need to know the man Enzo Mancini used to be. Before the money, before the power. Before he learned that showing weakness in his world was a death sentence. You need to understand the night 15 years ago when a terrified young woman made a choice that would echo through time like a gunshot. Enzo Mancini didn't believe in accidents. In his world, every move was calculated, every encounter orchestrated. Random didn't exist, only patterns you hadn't recognized yet. Which is why the child terrified him more than any gun ever had. He kept his face blank as Sharon Lopez sat on the leather sofa in the hotel manager's private office, Marco hovering nearby with a steaming cup of hot chocolate. But Enzo's mind was running combat scenarios. Someone had sent this girl. Had to be. The timing was too perfect, the breach too clean. 3-year-olds didn't bypass security systems designed to stop trained killers. Unless they weren't meant to. "Sharon," Enzo said, pulling a chair close but not too close. His voice was gentle, the tone you'd use with a frightened animal. "How did you get inside the hotel?" "Through the big doors." She pointed toward the main entrance, her small finger shaking slightly. "The guards didn't stop you. There was a fancy car. Lots of people. I just walked in behind them." Her eyes dropped to the hot chocolate. "Mommy always says I'm good at being invisible." That tracked. Service workers trained their kids early. Blend in, stay quiet, don't draw attention. But it still felt wrong. Enzo leaned forward slightly, studying her. Up close, the details were damning. Her sweater wasn't just oversized, it was threadbare at the elbows, the fabric pilled from too many washes. Her sneakers had been repaired with duct tape wrapped around the sole. Her hands were red and raw, not just from cold but from something else. Enzo recognized the signs. Dishwashing soap, industrial cleaners, the kind of chemicals that ate through skin with enough exposure. She smelled like bleach and fabric softener. The scent clung to her clothes, her hair, even her skin. It was the smell of someone who lived in the invisible spaces of luxury. Laundry rooms, supply closets, housekeeping corridors where the wealthy never looked. This wasn't a plant. Plants came polished, rehearsed, clean. This girl was exactly what she appeared to be. Desperate poverty wrapped in a child's body, which made everything infinitely more complicated. "Your mommy," Enzo said carefully. "What's her full name?" "Maria Elena Lopez." Sharon's voice steadied when talking about her mother, like the woman was her anchor. "She cleans the rooms here. She works real hard. She comes home tired, but she still makes me dinner and helps me practice my letters. She's the best mommy." Maria Lopez. The name landed like a blade between Enzo's ribs, but he didn't flinch, didn't blink. 20 years of discipline held his expression neutral even as his memory detonated. Rain. Blood. An alley. A terrified teenage girl with shaking hands and a hotel apron soaked red. Not now. He couldn't afford to think about that now. "Marco," Enzo said without turning. "Step outside." Marco hesitated, unusual for him, but obeyed. The door clicked shut. Enzo pulled out his phone, typing rapid-fire messages. To Carlo, lock lobby. No entry/exit. Silent protocol. No panic. To Vincent. Employee records. Maria Lopez. Housekeeping. Last 20 years. Everything. To Tommy. Security footage. Last 6 hours. Find how the kid got in. Every angle. Responses came back instantly. Professional. Efficient. No questions. Enzo pocketed the phone and looked at Sharon again. She'd wrapped both hands around the hot chocolate cup, absorbing its warmth. Her eyes were half closed, exhaustion finally catching up to adrenaline. "Sharon, where's your mommy right now?" "They took her away." The girl's voice cracked. "Bad men came to our apartment. Mommy was crying. She told me to hide in the closet, but I saw through the crack. They said she did something wrong, but she didn't. Mommy never does anything wrong." "What did these men look like?" "Big. Dark suits like yours. One had a scar." Sharon traced a line down her own cheek. "Right here. They said she had to come with them. That she'd be home soon if she was smart." Enzo's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Dark suits. Scar on the cheek. That was Castellano crew. Lower level muscle, the kind you used for intimidation, not execution. Which meant Maria was still alive. For now. "And you came here because?" "Mommy keeps a photo. Hidden in her Bible." Sharon's eyes were fully open now, locked on Enzo's. "It's old and wrinkly. You're in it, standing outside this hotel. She circles your face sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping. She whispers, 'If anything ever happens to me, find this man. He pays his debts.'" The room tilted slightly. Enzo forced himself to breathe normally. Maria had kept a photograph. For 15 years. Not as blackmail. She'd never asked for anything. but as insurance. A last resort for her daughter if the world finally crushed her. Never get personally involved. That was Enzo's cardinal rule. The moment you cared about someone in this business, they became a weapon pointed at your chest. He'd watched his own father die because of personal attachments. Had sworn he'd never make the same mistake. But debts weren't personal. Debts were business. And Maria Lopez had saved his life when no one else would. The door opened. Vincent stepped inside, tablet in hand. His expression made Enzo's stomach drop. "Boss," Vincent said quietly, "you need to see this." Enzo stood, walking to where Vincent stood. The tablet screen showed a personnel file, but Vincent's face told him everything he needed to know before reading a single word. This wasn't random at all. It was so much worse than that. Vincent's tablet showed a grainy photograph attached to Maria Lopez's employee file. Enzo stared at it, and 15 years collapsed into 15 seconds. 15 years earlier. The rain came down like bullets, turning the alley behind the Astor Grand into a river of filth and broken glass. Enzo Mancini lay crumpled against a dumpster, one hand pressed uselessly against the hole in his side. Blood leaked between his fingers, warm and thick, mixing with rainwater and garbage runoff. 23 years old. Already a made man. And dying because he'd trusted the wrong person. His cousin Frankie had set him up. Clean and simple. A fake meeting, a silenced pistol, a trunk ride that ended with Enzo dumped in this alley like trash. They'd taken his phone, his gun, everything. Left him to bleed out where no one would find him until morning. Smart. Efficient. The kind of betrayal Enzo would have respected if he wasn't the victim. His vision was starting to blur at the edges, that dreamy fog that came before the darkness. He wondered if his father would be waiting on the other side. Wondered if the old man would be disappointed or proud that his son had died the family way. Young and violent. Then he heard footsteps. Light. Quick. Someone running. A side door burst open, yellow light spilling into the alley. A girl appeared. Couldn't have been more than 19, wearing a hotel housekeeping uniform and carrying 2 bags of trash. She froze when she saw him. Their eyes met. Enzo tried to speak, but only managed a wet cough that brought up blood. The girl dropped the trash bags. Her hands flew to her mouth. Run, Enzo thought. Smart move. Run and forget you saw anything. But she didn't run. She looked left, then right, checking if anyone else was watching. Then she moved toward him, her whole body shaking like she was walking toward a bomb. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, oh God." "Go," Enzo managed. His voice sounded like gravel. "Cops, come dead." "You're bleeding so much." Her accent was thick. Central American, maybe. Her name tag read Maria in faded letters. "I need to, I have to." She yanked off her apron, pressed it against his wound. The pressure sent lightning through Enzo's nervous system, but the fog receded slightly. She was crying now, tears mixing with rain on her face. "Please don't die. Please, please don't die. Call." Enzo fumbled for words. Number. Wallet. Maria's hands trembled as she searched his jacket, found his wallet. Inside was a business card with nothing but a phone number. She pulled out her cheap flip phone, dialed with shaking fingers. When someone answered, she spoke quickly in broken English. Your friend. Behind hotel. Alley. Hurt bad. Come now. Please. She hung up. Looked at Enzo with terrified eyes. They're coming, she said. They said 10 minutes. You have to stay awake. Please stay awake. Enzo wanted to tell her to leave before his crew arrived, before she got caught up in something that would destroy her. But his mouth wouldn't work anymore. Maria kept pressure on the wound, kept talking, nervous, rapid Spanish prayers mixed with English reassurances. She dragged him behind the dumpster, out of sight from the street. Used her body to shield him from the rain. When headlights finally swept the alley, she looked at Enzo one last time. You don't know my name, she whispered. I was never here. Then she vanished back through the service door like smoke. Present day. It's her, Vincent confirmed, pulling Enzo back to the present. Maria Elena Lopez. Hired 3 months after the incident. Personnel notes say she specifically requested employment at the Astor Grand. Has worked here continuously for 15 years. Spotless record. Never missed a shift until 3 days ago. Enzo's hand unconsciously moved to his side, where a scar still marked the place her apron had pressed against. The bullet had missed vital organs by centimeters. If she'd been 30 seconds later, if she hadn't stopped the bleeding, if she'd called the cops instead of his crew, he'd be dead. And she'd never asked for anything. Not money, not protection, not even acknowledgement. She'd just disappeared into the machinery of the hotel. One more invisible face keeping luxury running. But she'd kept that photograph. Hidden in a Bible. Insurance for her daughter. If anything ever happens to me, find this man. He pays his debts. Sharon's voice came from behind him, small and drowsy. Did you find my mommy? Enzo turned. The girl was fighting sleep, her eyes heavy but determined. He'd forgotten she was still there, had forgotten to guard his expression. For just a moment, she'd seen past the mask to something human underneath. Vincent, Enzo said quietly. What else? Vincent's jaw tightened. Maria Lopez was detained 3 days ago by Castellano Associates. They're holding her at a private medical facility in Queens, the one they use for off-books work. According to our source inside, she witnessed a transaction she shouldn't have. Wrong place, wrong time. And they questioned her. Got rough. She fell, hit her head. Vincent's voice dropped. Internal bleeding, boss. She's critical. They're keeping her sedated, waiting to see if she dies on her own so they don't have to make it messy. The room went silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Enzo looked at the dollar bill still in his jacket pocket. One crumpled dollar. A child's entire fortune. Payment for a debt 15 years overdue. How long does she have? Enzo asked. Vincent met his eyes. 6 hours. Maybe less. Sharon had finally fallen asleep on the sofa, her small body curled around the empty hot chocolate cup. She looked impossibly fragile, like the world could break her with one wrong move. Maria had saved Enzo's life expecting nothing in return. Now her daughter was collecting a debt Enzo hadn't known he owed. Wake up Carlo and Tommy, Enzo said, his voice cold as winter. And get me everything we have on the Castellano operation in Queens. Floor plans, security details, shift rotations. Everything. Boss, if we move on this. 6 hours. Enzo cut him off. That means we have 5 before I stop being reasonable about it. Vincent nodded and left. Enzo walked to the window, looking out at Manhattan's glittering skyline. His city, his empire, built on a foundation of calculated distance, strategic ruthlessness, and never getting personally involved. But Maria Lopez had broken that rule 15 years ago when she chose mercy over survival. Now it was Enzo's turn to return the favor, even if it cost him everything. The file Vincent compiled over the next 30 minutes painted a picture of casual cruelty that made Enzo's blood run cold. Carlo spread surveillance photos across the conference table. Grainy shots of a nondescript building in Queens with blacked-out windows and reinforced doors. The sign outside read St. Agnes Medical Clinic, but everyone in their world knew what it really was. A place where the Castellano family handled problems that couldn't see daylight. 2 guards at the front, Carlo pointed to the images. Rotating shifts every 6 hours. Another 3 inside, based on heat signatures. They're keeping her in the second-floor recovery room, sedated and under watch. Vincent pulled up medical records on his tablet. Information that had cost Enzo 3 favors and 10 grand in the last 20 minutes. Maria Lopez. Admitted 72 hours ago with head trauma and internal injuries. The attending physician, who's on Castellano's payroll, logged it as a fall downstairs. And the real story? Enzo's voice was flat, controlled. She was cleaning a high-roller suite at the Plaza 2 nights ago. Walked in on Vincent Castellano Jr. and his crew counting cash from a protection racket. She saw faces, heard names, saw money. Vincent scrolled through incident reports. They grabbed her immediately, brought her to the clinic for questioning. Tommy leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Questioning was a polite word for what the Castellanos did to witnesses. They worked her over, Vincent continued. During the interrogation she fell or was pushed, hit the corner of a metal table. Skull fracture, brain bleeding. Now she's a liability dying on their watch. And the theft charge? Enzo asked. Fabricated. Carlo slid another document across the table. They're claiming she stole 50 grand in jewelry from the same suite. Convenient story. Makes her look criminal instead of a witness. The real thief was a housekeeper named Rosa Mendez, but she conveniently overdosed yesterday morning in a Brooklyn motel. Enzo's jaw tightened. Rosa Mendez hadn't overdosed. She'd been eliminated. Clean, quiet, problem solved. And Maria was set up to take the fall. A poor immigrant maid with no connections, no power, no one to fight for her. The perfect scapegoat. Medical prognosis. Enzo asked, though he already knew the answer would be bad. Vincent's expression darkened. Without surgery in the next few hours, the bleeding in her brain will kill her. But the Castellanos aren't authorizing surgery. They're waiting to see if she dies naturally. Saves them the trouble of making it look like an accident. And if she survives, then she's a murder witness who can put Vincent Jr. away for 20 years. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The Castellanos weren't just silencing a witness. They were doing it slowly, letting medicine do their dirty work. If Maria died under sedation from complications of her fall, no one would ask questions. Just another poor woman who had an accident and couldn't afford better care. They assume you won't care, Vincent said quietly. She's nobody to them. A maid. Expendable. They have no idea she saved your life. Enzo walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Manhattan sprawled below him, a city of calculated transactions and cold mathematics. In his world, you didn't act on emotion. You didn't start wars over principle. You definitely didn't risk your empire for a dying woman you hadn't seen in 15 years. But Maria Lopez hadn't calculated risk when she found him bleeding in that alley. She'd just acted. Had chosen mercy when survival meant walking away. The Castellanos think I won't care, Enzo repeated, his voice soft and deadly. They're about to learn exactly how wrong they are. He pulled the crumpled dollar bill from his pocket, holding it up to the light. George Washington's face was barely visible through the wrinkles and water stains. A child's entire savings. $1 against an empire. The math didn't make sense. One maid, no matter her past kindness, wasn't worth the war this would start. Wasn't worth the alliances it would shatter, the blood it would cost, the empire it might topple. But Enzo had built his reputation on one principle. He always paid his debts. Always. He thought of Sharon curled up on the sofa down the hall, sleeping in her threadbare clothes, believing $1 was enough because her mother had told her the truth, that Enzo Mancini honored his obligations. He thought of Maria at 19, terrified and shaking, pressing her apron against his wound with trembling hands. Please don't die. Please, please don't die. She'd saved him when she had every reason to let him bleed out. When helping him could have destroyed her life. When mercy made no logical sense. Now it was his turn. Enzo folded the dollar bill carefully, creasing it with precise movements, then slipped it back into his inner jacket pocket, right over his heart, where it rested like a sacred talisman. Carlo, he said, turning from the window. His voice was calm, but everyone in the room recognized the tone. It was the voice Enzo used before he burned something to the ground. Call our people at Mount Sinai. I want their best neurosurgeon on standby within the hour. Private operating room, full team, cost irrelevant. Boss. Tommy. Contact our lawyer. I want documentation on every dirty judge, every compromised cop, every politician the Castellanos own. Package it. Have it ready to send to the FBI, the U.S. Attorney, and the New York Times if necessary. Tommy nodded, already pulling out his phone. Vincent. Freeze every account we can touch that has Castellano fingerprints. Shell companies, real estate holdings, offshore accounts. Everything. I want them to wake up tomorrow financially bleeding. That's going to start a war, Vincent said quietly. Enzo's eyes were cold as winter. No. It's going to end one before it begins. He looked at each of his men, seeing their concern, their calculation, their loyalty warring with their survival instincts. Maria Lopez saved my life 15 years ago and never asked for a single thing in return. Her daughter just paid me $1 to return the favor. Enzo's voice was steady, final. That makes this personal. And I don't lose personal debts. The room fell silent. We move in 2 hours, Enzo continued. Surgical strike. No civilian casualties. We extract Maria, get her to Mount Sinai, and make it very clear to the Castellanos that they just made a catastrophic error in judgment. He pulled the dollar from his pocket one more time, studying it in the lamplight. This, Enzo said softly, is the most expensive payment I've ever accepted, because it's going to cost me everything I've built to honor it. He looked at his men. And I'm going to pay it anyway. Enzo didn't raise his voice, didn't slam doors, didn't make dramatic pronouncements. He simply sat at his desk, pulled out his encrypted phone, and began systematically dismantling the Castellano family's empire one phone call at a time. The first call went to Richard Chen, a senior VP at Manhattan Trust and Savings. Richard. Enzo Mancini. I need you to freeze some accounts. His voice was conversational, like he was ordering dinner. All holdings tied to Castellano Imports LLC, Triborough Development Group, and the East River Holdings Shell Corporation. Yes, I'm aware they're clients. Not anymore. Chen hesitated. Enzo, that's over $40 million in assets. The compliance review alone. There is no review, Richard. You're going to flag those accounts for suspicious activity. Money laundering investigation. Federal interest. Whatever language makes the paperwork stick. Enzo's tone didn't change, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. And Richard, remember who co-signed your mortgage when the bank turned you down. Remember who made that DUI disappear for your son last year. Silence on the other end. Then, the accounts will be frozen within the hour. Good man. The second call went to his lawyer, David Moskowitz, a shark in a $10,000 suit who'd gotten 3 governors elected. David, I need a package delivered. Every piece of documentation we have on Castellano operations. The bribes, the judges, the off-books transactions. Everything. Enzo scrolled through files on his tablet while talking. Send copies to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force, and have a courier standing by for the Times if I give the word. Jesus, Enzo, you realize what you're asking? This exposes their entire network. That's the point. It also exposes some of your connections, overlap with their operations, shared interests. I'm aware. Enzo's voice was calm. Do it anyway. David exhaled slowly. This is scorched earth. No, it's precision demolition. There's a difference. The third call went to Anthony Giordano, who controlled most of the Longshoremen's Union on the East Coast docks. Tony, the Castellano shipment coming through Port Newark tomorrow morning? It doesn't arrive. Enzo, that's 3 containers of. I don't care what's in them. They get held up in customs. Inspected. Delayed indefinitely. Make it look routine. Tony's voice dropped. The Castellanos are going to know this came from you. I'm counting on it. Enzo made 7 more calls in the next 30 minutes. Each one was surgical, calculated, devastating. A sympathetic city councilman suddenly remembered building code violations at 2 Castellano-owned properties. Construction halts. Fines pending. A health inspector discovered rats at a Castellano restaurant, the flagship location that laundered most of their cash. Immediate closure. 3 shell corporations tied to Castellano money found their business licenses mysteriously tied up in bureaucratic red tape that could take months to untangle. A shipping broker who handled their overseas transactions received a better offer from Enzo's people. Exclusive contract, double the rate. He switched sides before lunch. Enzo wasn't breaking bones. He was breaking infrastructure. The invisible network of corruption, favors, and mutual interests that kept criminal enterprises running smoothly. He was pulling threads, and the Castellano organization was starting to unravel. By 3 a.m., Vincent returned with updates. The Castellanos are scrambling. Their accounts are frozen, their shipments stuck, their legitimate businesses under investigation. Vincent Jr. has been making calls for the past hour trying to figure out what's happening. And nobody's answering. The people who used to take his calls are suddenly unavailable. Tommy entered behind Vincent. Word on the street is spreading. The Castellanos crossed someone big. Nobody knows who yet, but the smart money is staying away from them. Enzo nodded. In their world, perception was everything. The moment people sensed weakness, the vultures circled. The Castellanos were bleeding, and everyone could smell it. The extraction team is ready, Carlo reported. 6 men. Ex-military. They'll hit the clinic at 4:30 a.m. Shift change, minimal security. In and out in under 10 minutes. Ambulance standing by. Unmarked. Direct route to Mount Sinai. Dr. Harrington and her team are prepped and waiting. Enzo stood, buttoning his suit jacket. And the Castellanos? Still don't know why this is happening, Vincent said. They think it's about territory. Maybe retaliation for something else. Good. Let them wonder. Enzo walked to the window. Dawn was beginning to break over Manhattan. Pink and gold lights spreading across the skyline like spilled paint. His city. His empire. Built on calculated ruthlessness and strategic distance. All of it now hanging in the balance because of a crumpled dollar bill and a 15-year-old debt. Boss, Carlos said carefully. Once we move on Maria, the Castellanos will know it was you. This goes from pressure to open war. Enzo turned. His expression was calm, almost serene. They started this war when they decided Maria Lopez was expendable. They just didn't know they'd already lost. He grabbed his coat from the rack, checked his watch. 4:15 a.m. The extraction happens in 15 minutes. I want real-time updates. The moment Maria is in that ambulance, I want to know. Where are you going? Vincent asked. Enzo paused at the door. Somewhere I never go. Tommy frowned. Boss. St. Patrick's Cathedral. I need to light a candle. The 3 men stared at him. Enzo Mancini didn't do churches. Didn't pray. Hadn't set foot in a cathedral since his father's funeral 20 years ago. But Maria Lopez had prayed over him in that alley 15 years ago. Desperate, terrified prayers in Spanish and broken English while her hands pressed against his wound. Please God, don't let him die. Please, please, please. Her prayers had been answered that night. Now it was Enzo's turn to ask for divine intervention. He walked out of the office into the pre-dawn darkness, his men scrambling to follow. The city was quiet, that strange suspended moment between night and morning when even New York held its breath. Enzo's car waited at the curb, engine running. Carlos slid into the driver's seat. Vincent took shotgun. Enzo climbed into the back, pulling out his phone for one final call. Marco, wake Sharon gently. Tell her I'm bringing her mother home. He ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, and felt the dollar bill resting against his heart. In 15 minutes, 6 men would storm a private clinic and extract a dying woman the Castellanos thought was already finished. In 30 minutes, Maria Lopez would be in surgery fighting for her life. And by sunrise, the entire New York underworld would know that Enzo Mancini had just started a war over a hotel maid. The car pulled away from the curb, heading downtown towards St. Patrick's Cathedral. Enzo stared out the window at his city waking up. Let them think I've gone soft, he thought. Let them think mercy makes me weak. They'll learn the truth soon enough. Mount Sinai's ICU existed in perpetual twilight. Soft blue lighting, the steady beep of monitors, and the mechanical whisper of ventilators keeping broken bodies alive. Enzo walked through the sterile corridors at 6:40 a.m., his tailored suit looking out of place among the scrubs and exhaustion. Marco had brought Sharon an hour earlier. The extraction had gone flawlessly. 6 minutes from breach to exit. Maria sedated and stabilized in the ambulance before the Castellano guards even realized what was happening. Dr. Harrington had been waiting at the surgical bay, her team already gloved and prepped. The surgery had taken 3 hours. Enzo found Sharon in the ICU waiting area, a space designed for vigils and prayers. She sat in a chair far too large for her small frame, her feet dangling 6 inches off the ground. Someone, probably a nurse, had given her a blanket and a juice box. The blanket was wrapped around her shoulders like a cape. The juice box sat untouched on the side table. Her eyes were fixed on the double doors leading to the ICU, watching them with the intensity of someone willing them to open through sheer force of hope. Marco stood nearby, looking uncomfortable in the role of babysitter. When he saw Enzo, relief flooded his face. "Boss," the doctor said. Enzo raised a hand. "Not now." Sharon's head turned at the sound of his footsteps. For a moment she just stared, this tiny girl who'd walked into his world with $1 and a prayer. Then recognition sparked in her eyes. She slid off the chair, the blanket falling away, and ran. Her small body collided with Enzo's legs, arms wrapping around his knees with surprising strength. She looked up at him, her face streaked with dried tears and exhaustion, but her eyes were wide with desperate hope. "Did my dollar work?" Her voice cracked on the words. "Did you save my mommy?" Enzo lowered himself slowly, one knee touching the cold hospital linoleum. It was the second time in 12 hours he'd knelt for this child, a gesture he'd made for no one else in 20 years. He was eye level with her now, close enough to see the fear still swimming behind the hope, the exhaustion pulling at her small features, the way her hands trembled as she clutched his jacket sleeve. "It worked better than you know," Enzo said quietly. Sharon's face crumpled. Relief, fear, exhaustion, all of it hitting her at once. She collapsed against his chest, sobbing into his expensive suit. Enzo's arms came up automatically, awkwardly, holding her with the careful uncertainty of someone who'd forgotten how to comfort another human being. Over her shoulder, he saw Dr. Harrington emerge from the ICU, still in surgical scrubs, pulling off her cap. She was in her 50s, brilliant and unflappable. The kind of surgeon who'd seen everything and was impressed by nothing. But her expression now was something close to awe. She walked over, waiting until Sharon's sobs quieted to hiccups before speaking. "Mr. Mancini, your friend is stable. The surgery was successful." Enzo felt Sharon tense in his arms, listening. "We had to relieve pressure on her brain and repair several bleeds," Dr. Harrington continued. her voice clinically precise but not unkind. She was maybe an hour from irreversible damage. Whoever kept her sedated and stable during transport saved her life. Prognosis? Enzo asked. Guarded but optimistic. She'll need weeks of recovery, possibly months. But she should make a full neurological recovery. It's... Dr. Harrington paused, choosing her words carefully. It's remarkable. Another few hours and we'd be having a very different conversation. Sharon pulled back from Enzo's chest, looking up at the doctor with red-rimmed eyes. My mommy's okay. Dr. Harrington's professional mask softened. She crouched down to Sharon's level. Your mommy is very strong. She's sleeping now, but she's going to be okay. Would you like to see her? Sharon nodded so hard her whole body moved. She won't be able to talk yet, the doctor warned gently. She has tubes helping her breathe. But you can hold her hand. Dr. Harrington stood, offering her hand to Sharon. The little girl took it, but looked back at Enzo one more time. Thank you, mister, she whispered. My $1 was enough. Then she followed the doctor through the ICU doors, her small hand swallowed by the surgeon's larger one. Marco stepped forward once they were gone. Boss, the Castellanos. Later. Enzo's voice was flat. But Vincent called. They know it was us. Vincent Jr. is making threats. I said later. Marco fell silent. He'd worked for Enzo long enough to recognize when his boss needed space. Enzo walked to the window overlooking Manhattan. The sun was fully up now, morning light reflecting off glass and steel. The city moved below, millions of people starting their day, completely unaware that somewhere in this hospital, a maid named Maria Lopez had just defied death. The doctors called it a miracle. Enzo knew better. It wasn't divine intervention. It was debt collection. 15 years ago, Maria had pressed her apron against his wound with shaking hands and refused to let him die. Last night, Enzo had torn apart a criminal empire and mobilized the best medical team money could buy. They'd both paid the same price, everything they had to give. The difference was Maria had given it freely, expecting nothing. Enzo had waited 15 years to be asked. He pulled the dollar bill from his pocket one more time. It looked even more pathetic in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Wrinkled, stained, barely recognizable as currency. A child's entire savings. $1 against an empire. But it had been enough. Because it hadn't bought medical care or protection or favors. It had bought something more valuable and infinitely more dangerous. It had bought Enzo's conscience back. He stood alone in that hospital corridor, surrounded by the hum of machines keeping people alive, and for the first time in decades allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he'd done. Not the strategic implications, not the political fallout, not the war he'd just started. Just the simple, terrifying fact that he'd chosen mercy over power. That he'd risked everything for one life. That somewhere in the cold machinery of his chest, something human still existed. The realization should have frightened him. Instead, it felt like waking up after 20 years of sleepwalking. Enzo folded the dollar carefully, precisely, and placed it back over his heart. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, machines beeped their steady rhythm. And somewhere in the ICU, a little girl held her mother's hand while a woman who'd shown mercy to a dying stranger 15 years ago fought her way back to life. The debt is paid, Enzo thought. But he knew, deep in the part of himself he'd tried to kill years ago, that this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, and he had no idea what came next. The hospital chapel was empty at 3 in the morning. Enzo found it on the ground floor, tucked away between the cafeteria and the east stairwell, a non-denominational space designed for prayers that rarely got answered. Rows of simple wooden chairs faced a plain altar. No crucifixes, no religious symbols, just soft lighting and silence thick enough to drown in. He hadn't planned to come here. After leaving Sharon with her mother in the ICU, Enzo had intended to return to his office, to manage the fallout, to strategize his next move against the Castellanos. Instead, his feet had carried him here. He sat in the back row, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Not praying. Enzo Mancini hadn't prayed since his father's funeral. Just sitting in the kind of silence he rarely allowed himself. The machines upstairs were keeping Maria Lopez alive. The best medical team money could buy was monitoring her recovery. Sharon was asleep in a chair by her mother's bedside, wrapped in a blanket some kind nurse had provided. And Enzo sat alone in a chapel, confronting something he'd spent 20 years avoiding. His own humanity. He thought about the lives he'd ruined. Not the rivals he'd eliminated in clean business transactions. Those were soldiers who knew the game. But the others. The collateral damage. The store owner whose shop got burned because he refused to pay protection. The accountant who'd seen too much and disappeared. The girlfriend of an informant who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Enzo had always justified it. Business. Necessity. The cost of maintaining order in a world that operated outside the law. But sitting here, in this quiet space designed for conscience and confession, the justifications felt thin as paper. He'd built an empire on calculated ruthlessness. Had turned himself into something more machine than man. Efficient, precise, unfeeling. Every decision filtered through cold logic. Does this serve my interests? Does this strengthen my position? Does this eliminate threats? Never. Is this right? Maria Lopez had thrown a wrench into that machinery. She'd saved him expecting nothing in return. Her daughter had trusted him with $1 and her mother's life. And Enzo had responded not with calculation, but with something dangerously close to emotion. He'd risked everything. His reputation, his alliances, his carefully constructed empire, for one woman's life. The terrifying part wasn't that he'd done it. It was that he'd do it again. Enzo pulled out his phone, stared at it for a long moment, then started typing messages. To Carlo, review all operations within 500 yards of schools or hospitals. Shut them down. Relocate if necessary. I don't care about the cost. To Vincent, set up an anonymous trust fund. $200,000 for Maria Lopez's medical expenses and rehabilitation. Make it untraceable. To Tommy, Maria Lopez and her daughter walk away clean. No surveillance. No protection unless requested. No contact unless they initiate. They're civilians now. Treat them as such. Each message felt like dismantling a piece of the fortress he'd spent decades building. In his world, you didn't let people walk away with knowledge of your operations. You didn't shut down profitable ventures for moral reasons. You definitely didn't fund someone's recovery and expect nothing in return. But Enzo sent the messages anyway. His phone buzzed almost immediately. Carlo. Boss, are you sure about this? Enzo typed back, "I've never been more sure of anything." Another buzz. Vincent, "The trust fund is fine, but letting them walk completely free, that's a security risk." Enzo's response was simple. "Some debts can't be paid with control. Let them go." He pocketed the phone and looked at the plain altar. No stained glass martyrs. No gilded angels. Just empty space where people brought their desperate hopes and heaviest guilts. "I don't know if anyone's listening," Enzo said quietly to the empty chapel. "I don't even know if I believe anymore. But Maria Lopez prayed for me 15 years ago when she had every reason to let me die. Her prayers got answered." He paused, feeling ridiculous but continuing anyway. "So I'm asking, not for me but for her. Let her walk away from this. Let her daughter grow up normal. Let them have the life they deserve." Silence answered him. The same silence that had answered every prayer, every plea, every desperate bargain made in this space. But Enzo felt something shift inside his chest anyway. Not divine intervention. Just the simple recognition that for the first time in 20 years, he cared more about one life than his entire empire. That realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like breathing after decades underwater. His phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. One of his street informants. Words spreading. People saying you went soft over some maid. Castellanos pushing the narrative hard. Other families paying attention. Enzo read the message twice, then typed a response. Let them talk. He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the chapel exit. At the doorway, he paused and looked back one more time at the empty altar. "If you are listening," he said quietly, "thank you for sending that terrified 19-year-old girl into an alley 15 years ago. Thank you for making her brave enough to help a stranger. And thank you for giving me a chance to finally pay that debt." He walked out into the fluorescent brightness of the hospital corridor. Upstairs, Maria Lopez was stable. Sharon was sleeping. The best medical care money could buy was keeping them safe. And somewhere in the city, Enzo's enemies were calling him soft. Let them, he thought. Let them think mercy makes me weak. They'd learn the difference between soft and strategic soon enough. But first, he had more important things to do. Like making sure a little girl and her mother could walk away from his world and never look back. Even if it cost him everything he'd built. Especially then. 3 days later, Enzo's office. Vincent placed a folder on Enzo's desk. The rumors are accelerating. 5 different sources report the Castellanos are calling you compromised. 2 smaller families are testing boundaries, pushing into territories they wouldn't have touched a month ago. Enzo opened the folder, scanned the intelligence reports. The vultures were circling, just as he'd expected. "And Maria Lopez?" he asked. "Recovering ahead of schedule. Dr. Harrington says she'll be ready for discharge within 2 weeks. Sharon's been staying with a foster family temporarily. Clean record, vetted by our people. No. Get them a place together. Hospital room converted to accommodate the child. Maria shouldn't wake up alone." Vincent hesitated. "Boss, this is already costing. I don't care what it costs." Enzo's voice was quiet but final. "Make it happen." Vincent nodded and left. Enzo returned to the reports. The underworld was adjusting, recalibrating. testing this new version of Enzo Mancini, who apparently valued mercy over reputation. They thought they understood what was happening. They had no idea. This wasn't weakness entering his empire. It was something far more dangerous. It was humanity. And Enzo was about to teach them all exactly how dangerous a man with nothing left to prove could be. The phone call came 3 weeks after Maria's surgery. Enzo sat in his office, reviewing financial reports, when Vincent entered with the encrypted cell phone. "It's Dominic Russo. He wants a meeting." Russo. The Bronx territory. Old guard, careful, calculating. If he was reaching out, it meant the other families had been talking. Enzo took the phone. "Dominic." "Enzo." Russo's voice was gravelly, weathered by decades of cigarettes and secrets. "We need to discuss the Castellano situation." "There is no situation. The Castellanos made a mistake. I corrected it. You dismantled a family operation over a maid." Russo's tone was neutral, but the implication hung heavy. People are concerned about what that means for business. "It means I honor my debts. Always have." Silence on the line. Then, "The Castellanos are claiming you've gone soft. That you're compromised. There's talk of territory realignment." Translation: Other families smelled blood in the water. They were testing whether Enzo's mercy had made him weak. "Tell the families I'm available for a sit-down," Enzo said calmly. "Neutral ground. 1 week. And the Castellanos won't be attending." Enzo ended the call before Russo could respond. The meeting happened 7 days later in a private room at Lombardi's, the oldest pizzeria in Little Italy, owned by a man who'd served 5 families for 40 years and survived by keeping his mouth shut. 6 men sat around a table built for 12. Russo from the Bronx, DeLuca from Staten Island, Chen from Chinatown, Moretti from the waterfront, Petrov from Brighton Beach, and Enzo. Vincent Castellano Jr. was notably absent. He'd tried to attend, but found his car wouldn't start that morning. By the time he arranged alternate transportation, the meeting was over. "Gentlemen," Enzo began, his voice even and cold, "I understand there are concerns about recent events." DeLuca spoke first. "You started a war over a housekeeper. That's not how we do business." "I ended a war," Enzo corrected. "The Castellanos detained a woman under my protection. They made her a scapegoat for their own incompetence. I responded proportionally." "Proportionally?" Moretti laughed without humor. "You froze 40 million in assets. You destroyed their supply chains. You fed half their operation to the feds. And I did it in 72 hours without firing a single shot." Enzo's eyes moved across each face. No bodies. No headlines. No federal heat on any of us. Just clean, precise pressure until the problem resolved itself. The men exchanged glances. That was the part they couldn't argue with. Enzo had dismantled a family operation without the chaos that usually came with mob warfare. No shootouts. No collateral damage. No attention. "The question," Russo said carefully, "is what this means going forward. If you'll go to war over a maid, what happens when there's a real dispute?" Enzo leaned forward. "Maria Lopez saved my life 15 years ago. Her daughter paid me to honor that debt. I did. That's not weakness, that's consistency. I've built my reputation on one principle. I always keep my word. Always. He let that sink in. Now let me be clear about what happens next. Anyone who wants to test me is welcome to try. But understand, I didn't survive 20 years in this business by being sentimental. I survived by being smarter than everyone else in the room. Enzo pulled out a folder, slid it to the center of the table. Inside were photographs, documents, ledgers. That's documentation on 3 shell corporations the Castellanos were using to skim from our joint waterfront operations. They've been stealing from all of us for 18 months. I discovered it during my investigation. The men grabbed the folder, passing documents around. Faces darkened as they read. I could have kept this to myself, Enzo continued. Used it as leverage. Instead, I'm sharing it. Because we're stronger when we operate on accurate information. Petrov looked up from the documents, his expression thoughtful. The Castellanos were stealing from all of us? 2 million across 5 families. I've frozen those accounts. The money can be redistributed fairly. DeLuca sat back reassessing. This wasn't the move of a man compromised by emotion. This was strategy. So what now? Chen asked. What do you want from this meeting? Recognition that I handled a personal matter without disrupting business. And agreement that the Castellanos answer for their theft. Russo studied Enzo for a long moment. Then nodded slowly. Agreed. But Enzo, no more surprises. Personal matters stay personal. Always have, Enzo said. Always will. The meeting ended 30 minutes later. As the men filed out, Russo pulled Enzo aside. That was smart, he said quietly. Turning your weakness into their problem. It was never weakness, Enzo replied. Just good accounting. 6 weeks later, Maria and Sharon Lopez moved into a modest 2-bedroom house in Montclair, New Jersey. Tree-lined street. Good schools. The kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors but minded their own business. The house came furnished. The rent mysteriously paid 6 months in advance. Maria didn't ask questions. She'd woken up in a hospital room with her daughter holding her hand and no memory of how she'd gotten there. The doctors said someone had saved her life. Maria had her suspicions about who. She'd found a note in her belongings after discharge. No signature. Just 8 words in neat handwriting. The debt is paid. Start fresh. Stay safe. She got a job managing a small cleaning company. One that never seemed short on contracts despite being brand new. The owner, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, asked no questions about Maria's past and paid better than anywhere Maria had ever worked. Sharon started preschool at Montclair Elementary. On her first day, during circle time, the teacher asked each child to share something about themselves. When it was Sharon's turn, she said proudly, I paid a scary man to save my mommy. The teacher smiled, thinking it was make-believe. That's a wonderful story, Sharon. It's not a story, Sharon said seriously. It really happened. I gave him my whole $1. Manhattan, Enzo's office. Vincent entered carrying a tablet. Boss, we've got incoming interest from the younger generation. 3 families want to send representatives to meet with you. Learn the business. Enzo looked up from his desk. Which families? Russo's nephew, DeLuca's son, and Chen's daughter. The next generation. Kids who'd grown up hearing stories about Enzo Mancini, the man who'd built an empire on precision and strategy rather than violence and chaos. Set up the meetings, Enzo said. But not here. Somewhere public. Coffee shops. Restaurants. I want them to see how business really works. Vincent nodded, making notes. The Castellanos are still quiet. Word is Vincent Jr. got demoted. His uncle took over operations. Good. Let that be a lesson. As Vincent left, Enzo walked to his window overlooking Manhattan. His empire was intact. Stronger even. The other families respected him not despite what he'd done for Maria, but because of how he'd done it. Clean. Smart. Decisive. He thought about Sharon in her preschool, telling her teacher about the scary man she'd paid with $1. In her world, it was already becoming a story, a memory that would fade with time. But for Enzo, it remained sharply present. A reminder that power wasn't just about control, it was about what you chose to do with it. He pulled out the dollar bill, now pressed flat and preserved in a clear protective sleeve. Still wrinkled. Still stained. Still worth exactly $1 in currency. And worth everything in principle. The next generation is watching, Enzo thought. Time to show them what real power looks like. 6 months later. The new recruit's name was Michael Russo. Dominic's nephew, 23 years old, sharp-eyed and ambitious. He'd been working under Enzo for 3 weeks, learning the business the way Enzo had learned it decades ago. By watching, listening, and keeping his mouth shut. Until today. They were in Enzo's office reviewing shipping manifests when Michael's attention drifted to the object mounted on the wall behind Enzo's desk. Between a Picasso sketch worth $500,000 and a first-edition Hemingway sat something that made no sense in this space of curated wealth and power. A crumpled dollar bill in a museum-quality glass case. Michael had noticed it before but hadn't dared ask. Today, his curiosity finally overwhelmed his caution. "Mr. Mancini," he said carefully, "can I ask you something?" Enzo looked up from the manifest. "You just did. The dollar bill. On your wall." Michael gestured toward it. "Why do you keep that there?" The office went quiet. Vincent, who'd been reviewing documents in the corner, looked up sharply. Carlo, standing by the door, tensed slightly. Everyone who worked for Enzo knew about the dollar. But no one talked about it. It was like a scar you didn't mention. Visible but untouchable. Enzo set down his pen, leaned back in his chair, and studied Michael for a long moment. The young man held his gaze, nervous but determined. Good. Fear without courage was useless. "That," Enzo said finally, "is the most expensive payment I ever took." Michael frowned, confused. "But it's just $1. "Just $1, Enzo repeated. He stood, walked to the glass case, and stood before it like a man contemplating a holy relic. "You know what I can buy with $1, Michael?" "Not much, sir." "Exactly. Can't buy loyalty. Can't buy silence. Can't buy protection or power or influence." Enzo's finger traced the edge of the glass without touching it. "But 6 months ago, a 3-year-old girl walked into the lobby of the Astor Hotel and tried to hire me with that $1. She wanted me to save her mother's life." Michael shifted uncomfortably. The story was already legend in certain circles, whispered in backrooms and bars, debated by men trying to understand what it meant. I took that dollar, Enzo continued. And in exchange, I dismantled a family's operation, froze 40 million in assets, burned alliances that took decades to build, started a war that's still echoing through the 5 boroughs. Over a maid, Michael said, then immediately regretted it when Enzo's eyes turned toward him. But Enzo didn't get angry. Instead, he smiled, a cold, knowing expression. Over a debt, Enzo corrected. 15 years earlier, that maid found me bleeding out in an alley. She could have walked away, could have called the cops, could have earned a reward that would have changed her life. He paused. She did none of those things. She saved me expecting nothing in return. And the daughter came to collect. No, the daughter came to ask. Enzo's voice softened almost imperceptibly. She offered me everything she had, $1, and trusted that would be enough, because her mother had taught her that I was a man who honored his debts. Michael looked at the dollar bill again, seeing it differently now. The wrinkles and stains weren't signs of worthlessness. They were evidence of a child's desperate grip, of hope compressed into paper currency. So why keep it? Michael asked. Why put it on display? Enzo turned back to his desk, but his eyes remained on the glass case. Because every man who walks into this office needs to see it. Every soldier, every lieutenant, every ambitious kid like you who thinks power comes from fear and violence. His voice hardened. That dollar reminds me, and should remind everyone, what real power looks like. I don't understand, sir. You will. Enzo sat back down, picked up his pen. Power isn't making people afraid of you, Michael. Any thug with a gun can do that. Real power is having the strength to honor your debts even when it costs you everything. It's choosing responsibility over ruthlessness. It's understanding that the moment you forget your humanity, you become a machine. And machines get replaced. Vincent spoke up from the corner, his voice quiet. The families thought you went soft after Maria Lopez. And Enzo asked without looking up from the manifest. And now they compete to send their children to learn from you. They call what you did the new way. Strategic, clean, principled. Michael processed this. The story he'd heard in whispers was about weakness, a feared crime boss compromised by emotion. But the truth was more complex. Enzo hadn't become weak. He'd become something more dangerous. He'd become unpredictable. A man who operated by codes that transcended simple profit and loss. That dollar cost me 40 million in assets, 3 key alliances, and 6 months of territorial conflict, Enzo said, finally looking up. But it bought me something more valuable. What's that? Michael asked. A reminder that I'm still human. That underneath all this, he gestured to his office, his empire, the city visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. I still have a conscience. And in this business, Michael, conscience isn't weakness. It's the only thing that separates us from animals. Enzo stood, walked to the window overlooking Manhattan. His city. His kingdom built on calculated violence and strategic ruthlessness. A little girl believed $1 was enough to save her mother because she trusted that truth and desperation were currencies I'd accept. She was right. He turned back to Michael. So I keep that dollar where everyone can see it. Where I can see it. Because the day I forget what it represents is the day I become the kind of man who deserves to lose everything. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of the city below. Michael stared at the dollar bill with new understanding. It wasn't a trophy. It was a conscience made visible. A promise kept and a warning issued. This is what matters. This is what real power protects. Any other questions? Enzo asked, returning to his desk. No, sir. Good. Then get back to work. Michael left, followed by Vincent and Carlo. Enzo remained alone in his office, surrounded by the trappings of power. Expensive art, rare books, a view that cost more per year than most people made in a lifetime. And in the center of it all, a crumpled dollar bill in a glass case. He thought of Sharon, now in kindergarten, telling her classmates about the scary man she'd once paid. He thought of Maria, managing her cleaning company, building a normal life far from his world. He thought of the men who'd tested him these past months. The rivals who'd assumed mercy made him vulnerable. Most had learned better. The ones who hadn't were no longer problems. Enzo Mancini was still feared. Still powerful. Still untouchable. But now he was something else too. Human. And that, he'd discovered, was the most dangerous thing of all. Because a man with nothing to lose was predictable. But a man who'd rediscovered what he had to lose? That man would burn the world down to protect it. Enzo pulled out his phone, sent one final message to Vincent. The Lopez family. Quarterly check-ins. No contact. Just make sure they're safe. Always. The response came immediately. Understood, boss. Enzo looked at the dollar bill one more time. Thank you, Sharon, he said quietly to the empty office, for reminding me who I used to be, and who I can still choose to be. Then Enzo Mancini, feared by millions, changed by one child and $1, returned to the business of running an empire. But he did it differently now. With conscience. With purpose. With the weight of that dollar pressed against his heart. Thanks for watching till the very end. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be dropping another unforgettable story tomorrow, so make sure you don't miss it.